Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Prospects Live and our YouTube videos that accompany articles here on the website. So my newest article is titled The Future of Pitching, and in it I have about a 9,000 word deep dive into what I expect the future of pitching to look like, analyzing trends, and picking apart different details in the baseball world to try and make some really good predictions on where this art of pitching is heading. And this will be kind of the companion video to that article. So that article is free to read on prospectslive.com. If you want to check out more work just like it, you can subscribe for as little as $5 a month on our website, and you can get that kind of content and so much more. So please check that out and all the amazing people over at Prospects Live. But let's get right into this kind of video here. The future of pitching isn't just about arsenals or stuff plus or any of these fun buzzwords. It's about so much more. It's about deception, and optimization is a word that I'll go over a lot throughout this video. And all of this is in order to kind of answer this one question: what is the future of pitching? So I'll give some background throughout this article, and we'll jump around a bunch. So just stay on your toes and skip around if you need to. I want to start off by thanking a bunch of people who did help me with this article. Most notably, Lance Brozdowski is kind of an idol of mine within the space, and he gave me some really good insight into a couple of these different topics, which he has already kind of talked about on his own YouTube channel. It's titled Lance Brozdowski, and he's brought up some really good points about things like pitch decay, which we're going to get into today. He's a leader in the space, so I definitely recommend you check him out. And then Colin Murray, who's a former professional coach for multiple organizations, most notably the Tigers, or most recently, that is. And me and Colin had a really great call where he helped me dissect and kind of pinpoint some of these different topics and how they actually apply to professional baseball organizations and pitching development in the big leagues. So huge shout out to those two guys and everyone else who has helped me throughout this journey. So let's get right into it. So kind of talking about background info here on arsenals. All right. So like when I look at an arsenal chart here, I'll pull up the spreadsheet right now. You guys will be seeing this on the screen. Four-seam fastballs, everyone throws one, right? Then the second most used pitch this year is actually a sinker, followed by a changeup, a slider, and then some other pitches at lower percentages. So we're seeing the typical mix be some combination of a four-seam fastball, sinker, changeup, slider. And obviously, guys have different, but pick 3 or 4 out of those pitches, and most guys probably have those. And the whole sinker movement really comes with the movement of seam effects within baseball. It's become a super well researched topic within baseball, where supinators and pronators alike can throw these sinkers, and they have a lot of benefit, especially to same-sided hitters. Like you'll see a lot of righties throw right on right sinkers on the inner half of the plate, and they perform really well. So yeah, I mean, sinkers are kind of a craze right now ever since seam effects became further researched. Let's get into some more kind of like splits-based stuff here. So right-handed pitchers, right? So obviously four-seam fastball at 100%. Sinkers right up around that 85% mark, which makes a lot of sense. Righties face righties most often, so they need a sinker to combat righties. And then right after that, sliders, obviously about 80% of the time, right on right slider makes a lot of sense. And then changeup for lefties as well. Some guys can throw changes or changeup variations to both sides of the plate. It just depends. We'll talk more about that later. When looking at right-handed pitchers, they average 4.8 pitch types in their arsenal. So almost 5 different pitches for every right-handed starting pitcher. All right, that seems kind of high, does it not? The average pitcher throws 4.5 pitches in their arsenal. So we see righties have to throw more pitches to get by. This is something interesting, but not necessarily surprising, because righties are at a bit of a disadvantage because you see so many of them, right? Lefties have that craft and that look that you don't see every day, which makes them harder to hit. So now, when we look at the best righties in the league, so I filtered by the top 5 right-handed pitchers by xFIP this year. So when we look at this actual chart for righties here, we see sliders and splitters as well at the 80% mark. That is super notable. Why are the best righties in the league throwing splitters rather than changeups? We'll get into that a little bit later, but it makes a lot of sense when we really think about it. Curveballs as well. Why are righties throwing curveballs? I thought curveballs were dead. More on that in a little bit. All right. Now, when we look at left-handed pitchers overall, we see that huge spike in changeup usage. Obviously, the changeup is going to be super effective versus right-handed batters who they're facing the most. This all makes sense, almost at a 90% clip there for changeup usage out of the average left-handed starter. Lefties average 4.2 pitches per Arsenal, which is kind of the lowest mark you're going to see today. When we go over the top 5 lefties in the league, though, they throw 4.7 pitches on average. So we're seeing this trend where the best pitchers in the league throw more pitches. That is important, right? And then the best pitchers in the league, they're sinkers and changeups. Wow, it makes a lot of sense, right? These are pitches that can get out either side of the plate, with the changeup getting out righties and the sinker getting out lefties. You don't need much more than a sinker and a breaking ball left on left to get by nowadays. So that's why we see these guys throw sinkers. And now let's talk about the Stuff Plus debate a little bit, right? So we've done this quick Arsenal research, and people tend to dislike Stuff Plus models because there's a lot of them out there, and you see some bad Twitter accounts posting their Stuff Plus models, which aren't very good and don't take into account the right things, but they get a lot of traction online because stuff is a word that gets thrown around, just about more than anything on baseball Twitter. Most plus models in general are diving into kind of, I called it freak territory in my article. I stand by that. But let's prove why Stuff Plus does matter at a base level. And when I do talk about Stuff Plus, I'm talking about OG Stuff Plus, Fangraphs. We're not talking about any other kind of Stuff Plus here. I'm using the OG. So, I ran some regression models just to show that Stuff Plus has a correlation with a lower FIP, right? So Stuff Plus it can explain 50% of the variation in XFIP, which is a huge amount. So this is just kind of me doing proofs to show that Stuff Plus is something that matters because it explains a lot of the numbers that really do matter, like XFIP, right? Better Stuff Plus equals better XFIP. That's just how it kind of works. So they do matter, maybe not as much as you think, or maybe less than you think. I don't know where you stand on the stuff scale, but these things do matter. A trend we often see with stuff models that I want to touch on is the bad fastball resulting in bad pitchers. So when you look at a list of the guys with the worst fastballs in the league, right here on your screen, I mean, these are not names that you necessarily want to be, seen next to. I mean, we're seeing kind of the worst pitchers in the league here, and this is just filtering by the worst fastballs in the league. So we're seeing a trend, bad fastball equals bad pitcher. Well, there's a couple guys who have been able to kind of duck that trend, who have bad four-seam fastball shapes. First up is Clay Holmes, who does not have a good four-seam fastball. It's actually one of the worst in the league, but he has 5 pitches in his arsenal, and he only uses his four-seam fastball 7% of the time. That's how you get away with the bad fastball, is you don't use it. You use secondary fastballs like cutters or sinkers in Clay Holmes' example. Jose Soriano throws 5 pitches, only an 8% four-seam fastball usage, so it's got an 81 Stuff Plus grade. Instead, he throws a bunch of sinkers. He throws really hard. It doesn't matter. The fastball shape is bad, so he throws sinkers. Framber Valdez, 5 pitches, 2% four-seam fastball usage. This is another guy who relies on other fastball options to get out. Sonny Gray, 6 pitches. This is the most interesting one of all, because he throws his four-seam fastball 21% of the time, but he has a pretty even spread with his pitch mix, which makes the fastball play kind of higher than the 85 Stuff Plus grade. So he's allowed to throw that 20% of the time because he has such good secondary offerings that work off of that suboptimal fastball shape. Ranger Suarez, another guy, really good pitcher, 6 pitches, 14% four-seam fastball usage. We see him use alternate fastballs as his primary pitch, right? And we notice with these guys who have bad fastball shapes but succeed, what's the common denominator here? They don't use the four-seam fastball very much, and they all have 5 or 6 pitches in Ranger Suarez and Sonny Gray's case, right? So you need an extra pitch, because earlier we determined, right, about 4.5 average pitches per MLB player. Well, we see these bad fastball guys have about 5.5 pitches on average. So you need to add an extra pitch if your four-seam fastball is bad. This all makes sense in my mind. So this brings us to our next point. Like, are more pitches better? Is that like what you need? So I ran a little model here, pitch arsenal depth versus XFIP. Okay, so you're seeing that on your screen right now. And if you can tell by that regression line, it's not super damning in the case of more pitches, meaning better arsenal depth. Well, why would that be? Well, we just determined that the guys with bad fastball shapes have to throw more pitches, right? So the guys with more pitches likely have worse fastballs, What did we see earlier when we looked at guys with bad fastballs? Not a whole lot of really good performers in there. So that's why that this correlation doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense, because the more pitches you have means you probably have a bad fastball. And if you have a bad fastball, you are less likely to succeed at the MLB level. However, there are outliers like we just discussed. So let's take a look at another graph here that compares XFIP and Stuff Plus to Arsenal depth. And we're seeing the kind of obviously the same trends with the XFIP and Arsenal depth graph there. And then looking at Stuff Plus by Arsenal depth, the guys who throw less pitches, meaning 2 to 3 pitches, which is 3 in the case of starters, have better Stuff Plus, which makes sense as well, because the more options you have, the less likely you are to have a bunch of good options, right? If you throw 7 pitches, it's really unlikely that all of those are going to be above average offerings, but they all serve a purpose, right? So that's why we see less pitches meaning more in terms of Stuff Plus. Let's draw some conclusions from this brief talk on arsenals before we move into the more fun stuff. Having more pitches doesn't always mean that they're effective. Some people have to throw more pitches out of necessity. For example, a bad fastball being a pronator versus a supinator, etc., etc. Dominant 2 pitches or 3 pitches that play off of each other is really the starting point for all of this, and then you don't need to add a whole lot from there. You can add around the edges. There are also reactionary reasons that need to be considered, right? Pitchers might add more pitches when they're struggling versus succeeding. Maybe there's a righty that can't get lefties out, so he adds a changeup, variation, and a cutter. Those might not be good pitches right away. You need to understand that everything is a reaction within baseball. It's this constant cat and mouse game. And the big conclusion is that Stuff Plus, tunneling, which we'll talk about soon, and command, they matter more than arsenal depth, right? Despite some pitchers' deep arsenals, they might not perform well. And this applies to about 25% of pitchers with deep arsenals. Those are like your Kyle Hendricks and your Miles Michaelises of the world. They're just not great pitchers at this day and age, but they have deep arsenals. So stuff is still king, but let's get into some deeper research. Pitch types. Fastballs are better than ever, but they're being thrown less than ever. Why? Fastballs get hammered. If your fastball's in the middle of the zone, it's the easiest pitch to hit in baseball. It's straight, right? Even though you have some good ride on the pitch or whatnot, if it's in a suboptimal location, the fastball can still get hammered. There's a lot of room for error with fastballs, and hitters are so used to seeing them because every fastball shape is so close to one another, right? There's a bunch of different slider and curveball shapes and all that, and you kind of have to figure out what a guy's doing. Fastballs are generally all the same, right? We can get into the sinker versus cutter versus ride debate, and those are kind of different shapes and different pitches altogether. We're talking 4-seam fastball. There's a pretty concise movement profile for that pitch, and it doesn't vary too much, but location matters a lot. If you don't have an elite fastball, you have to add more pitches to your arsenal to get by, but we just proved that. So let's shift our focus here. Now more than ever, having multiple fastballs matters. Throwing all 3, cutter, sinker, and hopefully a verti fastball is probably best. Having a cutter and sinker gives a pitcher access to controllable, higher velocity pitches that allow them to decrease their 4-seam usage, while making their 4-seam fastball in turn play better than its Stuff Plus grade because you use it less. The less a batter sees it, the less it's affected by things like pitch decay, and the better you can tunnel it. And you can start using your 4-seam fastball as a secondary. It's a lot easier to command that secondary than something like a sweeper. So it's a real weapon to have if you have multiple fastball shapes. We see a lot of elite pitchers use their 4-seam fastball as kind of this equal primary or even a secondary pitch. And Skubal is one of the best examples of this. Skubal knows his advantage as a hard-throwing lefty, and his pitches reflect that, with the second best pitch in the league right now being his changeup. I believe it's at a 19 run value, which is just insane. It's only behind Joe Ryan's fastball, which is elite. Because of this, Skubal throws his changeup as his primary pitch at 32% of the time, right? That's the reason it has that run value, because he throws it so damn much. Behind that, his 2 fastballs are his secondaries at 27% usage for the 4-seam and 25% usage for the sinker. Tarek also understands his platoon pitch advantages, dialing up way more changeup and 4-seamers versus righties where they play a little bit better, while transitioning to 40% sinkers and 20% changeup slider versus lefties, understanding that the sinker is going to play better than the 4-seam fastball against his same-handed opponents. Skubal cares about platoon advantages, and his pitch mix reflects that. That is why he's the best pitcher in the league. Moving on, talking about the Boston Red Sox. they get their own little category here because they're so weird. They're zigging when everyone else is zagging or slowly zagging behind them. The Red Sox consistently look to acquire players with really good four-seam fastball shapes, which makes a lot of sense because we know fastballs are king and lead to better outcomes. But they get these guys with really good fastballs, and they don't have them throw that fastball that much. The Red Sox lead the minor leagues in breaking ball usage at 47% usage on breaking balls. That's really high. It's over 3% higher than the next team. And this just kind of proves our point that while having an elite fastball is great, that's not the direction that pitching is going. The direction that pitching is going is having really good secondary stuff that isn't a fastball, or at least a four-seam fastball in this case, and learning how to throw that in the zone and collect zone whiffs on it. And the Red Sox are bucking the trend of old. And I think it's really cool. Good fastball shapes are also one of the more like platoon neutral pitches in the game, allowing pitchers to increase fastball usage towards opposite-handed hitters while throwing way more breakers in platoon favorable matchups. So that's where we could see a guy throw 50% sliders right on right, and then he gets to right on left and he's throwing 60% fastballs because he has that really good fastball shape, but he understands what pitches work better against each side. So now that we established that four-seam fastballs don't need to be your primary pitch, let's keep going down this road of pitch types, right? So my next question is, how do you round out an arsenal? I want to share a quick story about my life first because I think it matters. So I was recently a college pitcher at Bushnell University in Oregon, and I got 2 elbow surgeries, right? There were nerve surgeries, some bone stuff going on in there. And after both of these surgeries, I changed as a pitcher completely. So I have this unique perspective. Before surgery, I was a pronator. I couldn't spin the ball at all, but I had a great changeup and I had a really efficient fastball that could be good at times, sinker. And then I was throwing cutter, gyro-y breakers that just didn't get anyone out. I was so changeup heavy. I was like 40-50% changeups early in my college career because that was my only really plus pitch in my arsenal. And then this funny thing happens after elbow surgery. For most people, you then lose a lot of range of motion in your elbow to reach that max pronation that I used to be able to get to. So I started becoming more of a supinator because that's where my bias was after surgery. So I switched from being a pronator to a supinator, which is not something that you see very often in baseball. So I have this weird thing where I've been on both sides of the coin, and man, being a supinator is so much more cool than being a pronator. And just to demonstrate, right, supinator, this side, get your fingers on the outside of the ball. Pronators kind of stay through it a little better, can get on the inside of that ball to get that arm side run a little bit easier. Being a supinator is so cool because then you have access to this thing called seam shifted wake, where if you cut a fastball, it can turn into a sinker if you have the right grip, and then you can access extra movement on all of your pitches if you're able to get into the seam shifted wake. A big thing for pronators is that they can't throw breaking balls hard, right? I was always throwing curveballs that were 15 miles an hour slower than my fastball, and they wouldn't get results because of that velo difference. But the only way I could get big movement on the pitch was by throwing them slower. That's because as a pronator, when you're trying to come through the zone and twist around that pitch, all your wrist wants to do in your natural mobility restrictions and biases, they want to have you back it up and get through the pitch, right? So I'm trying to throw a curveball and get around it, and all my arm wants to do is go on this side of the ball. So I get somewhere in the middle, and I just end up throwing really bad backed up breaking balls consistently throughout my career. When we're a supinator, you naturally get to the inside of that ball. It allows you to throw it a little bit harder, get more spin, more movement, et cetera, right? Supinator is king within baseball, if that isn't clear yet. If you're a pronator, I don't recommend getting surgery, but I recommend trying to find a way to reach high velocity breaking balls through repetition, because that's going to be your best bet at making it out of sinker, fastball, changeup territory for the rest of your life. So I'll throw in a video here from when I pitched at Bushnell University, because why not? I gotta flex a little bit, right? Mind that the camera angle makes these pitches look really bad, but these are the pitches I was able to access after this surgery, now being a supinator, right? I now have a good slider that actually does something. I have a sinker. It doesn't move a whole lot on this pitch, but it serves its purpose, right? You collect a strike on that pitch. And then I've got this new fun changeup called a kick change. I love the addition of the kick change. I don't have big enough fingers to throw a splitter, and I couldn't throw a seam-shifted weight changeup very well, so I opted for the kick change, which had a bunch of vertical movement. Sometimes it cut, sometimes it went arm side. It was awesome because it was a super vertical pitch, and I never knew where it was going, but it had big movement, and that's what matters. And then I threw a curveball. That was not a great pitch, bad camera angle there. And then I finished the batter off with a fastball. Let's remind ourselves, how many fastballs had I thrown in this at bat? One. It was a sinker. Wow. Now I break out a ride four-seamer at the end of an at bat, right on right, in a weird spot. That works because I pitched backwards throughout my whole career because I didn't throw very hard, right? I was sitting in the low 80s in college. I was a softest thrower around. Being able to pitch backwards and command your secondaries allows that arsenal expansion to then use your bad pitches as put-out pitches, like my fastball, because guys are so used to me spinning and spinning and spinning to where things kind of worked out with my fastball late in counts. Let's move on from that, though. Let's go into why cutters matter. Cutters are one of the easiest quick fixes to an arsenal because it allows for this bridge pitch. While this is not a new idea, I believe it's still an important part of the conversation. Back in 2022, 4 guys from Prospects Live published the first public pitch tunneling study on the internet, and you should definitely go check that out. Link is in the article. And pitch tunneling can help an arsenal play up from stuff ratings while also being a key explanation for why good pitchers are not performing well in game. Their pitches don't tunnel. Just because it looks really good in Stuff Plus and on a movement plot doesn't mean that the pitches are actually good. The most usable tunnel is between fastballs and sliders, with these specs needed to properly tunnel the two pitches. Horizontal separation between 6 and 14 inches, vertical separation between 8 and 16 inches, velocity separation between 6 and 11 miles per hour. Right, those are broad ranges, but not very many pitches fit into all 3 of those buckets or even 2 of them. And while we haven't, gotten to our section on sweepers yet, that's coming soon, pitch tunneling is a key factor in why sweepers perform worse than other, tighter breaking ball shapes. Vacuum sweepers are great, especially on stuff models. They have big movement, and big movement collects outs most of the time, but you have to have the right arsenal context to throw that big sweeper. Let's take a look at JP Sears, who's a lefty for the Athletics. Sears' numbers are well below average, but he throws one of the best sweepers in baseball. In fact, it's the 3rd best sweeper in the league right now with a 9 run value and great stuff grades. Here's the problem, though. Sears' mix does not allow this sweeper to play as well as it should. While the lefty sweeper will never perform as well in game because you're facing a lot of righties, Sears gets far worse results on his sweeper in game than any of these other top guys in the sweeper game. Why do you think that is? Well, there's a 24-inch horizontal separation and only a 7.5-inch vertical separation between his sweeper and 4-seam fastball. Let's remind ourselves, the horizontal separation to properly tunnel these needs to be between 6 and 14 inches. Well, this is a 24-inch gap in separation between the fastball and sweeper, which are his 2 most thrown pitches. There is no tunnel to speak of between those 2. They look completely different to a hitter. It's untunnelable, if that is a word. JP also has a slider, which isn't bad per se, but it trends more towards sweeper territory and does not provide a good middle ground between the fastball and sweeper to act as a bridge pitch. That is where a cutter would come in. If he had a cutter, those pitches would be able to tunnel because he has a bridge pitch between his 2 most used pitches. That will help hitters be less on time, first and foremost, and make them start second-guessing their decisions because movement patterns start to look more similar. So with tunneling, I mean, the cutter is a great velocity median, first of all, but it also provides that bridge pitch, which matters. And the real bridge pitch in MLB is a cutter because of its spot on the movement plot. You can tunnel multiple pitches kind of off that cutter. To quote the tunneling study I was just talking about, here's what they had to say about cutters. Most of the players with an extreme deviation in their horizontal movement on the fastball and slider who still find results have one thing in common. They throw the cutter. In fact, half of these sliders in our data set that have over 17 inches of horizontal separation from the primary and still get chases 35% of the time pair with a cutter. That is how you beat the horizontal separation game. Cutters, sorry, that was me. That wasn't a quote. Cutters are the living miracle that makes sweepers usable and tailing two-seamers effective as well. The purpose of a cutter is to split the plate and bridge extreme gaps in both vertical and horizontal movement between a fastball and slider. Cutters matter. Adding a cutter to Sears' profile would obviously do great, especially because righties have an opponent batting average of .563 against his sinker, which he's currently trying to use left on right. That's never going to work. Maybe we should add a cutter in there, JP. This isn't just a Sears problem, though. 50% of starting pitchers have a sweeper in their arsenal, with a solid amount of those pitchers not also having a cutter to accompany that pitch. While big horizontal pitches can get great results and limit damage while increasing whiff, those stats are only reachable by having pitches to bridge horizontal gaps. After learning all this information, I think a fair assumption is that pitchers who succeed while only throwing 3 or 4 pitches have great tunneling between their pitches. I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but there are only 9 pitchers who throw 3 pitches over 5% of the time. So these are your guys with super small arsenals. Those are Dylan Cease, Jeffrey Springs, Kevin Gausman, Tyler Anderson, Jack Flaherty, Christopher Sanchez, Jacob deGrom, Chris Sale, and Lucas Giolito. That is a star-studded cast of pitchers, and a lot of them are on the older side, coming from old baseball where you didn't need as many pitches. Why are these guys outliers? Because they all tunnel their pitches so well. Tyler Anderson and Kevin Gausman are 2 of the most popular names in the tunneling movement that I can think of. Let's pull the numbers, though, of Jacob deGrom, who is succeeding while only throwing 3 pitches at a typical rate. When we look at Jacob deGrom's pitch movement plot right here that I created myself, his fastball and slider check all 3 tunneling boxes. So those pitches tunnel incredibly well off each other, allowing them to play up from their stuff plus grades. But guess what? Jacob deGrom already has really good stuff. So now he has even better stuff. Fastballs and changeups tunnel a little bit differently, with vertical break separation and velocity separation being key contributors to that tunnel, as well as location. Well, Jacob deGrom locates his fastball really well at the top of the zone, so he locates his changeup very well in turn at the bottom of the zone, helping that tunnel out. So Jacob deGrom tunnels his 3-pitch mix incredibly well, which is why he's one of the best pitchers of all time when everything is going right. Let's talk about rounding out an arsenal. So we've established the differences between pronation and supination, but what is the ultimate separator in pitching? A combination of shape and velocity. In order for a pronator to throw that slider, right, they lose a bunch of velocity, which is why they can't get to the other side of that 0 line without sacrificing something that matters, which is velocity on breaking balls. It matters a lot more than you think. A great example of this is Logan Henderson, who's been really good for the Brewers this year in limited opportunities, but he throws 2 pitches, and that is not something that you want to see from a starter, right? He's got an elite fastball and an elite changeup, but 2 elite pitches isn't enough to go off anymore. He throws a cutter and a slider, and they aren't very good. You can see him on this pitch movement plot. They hang right around the 0 line. They don't have good movement. They're not fast enough. Nothing is going well. There's no tunnel ability off these pitches because they're so close together. Things are not going well for the Logan Henderson as a long-term starter debate until someone figures out how to add hard breaking balls to these pronation dominant guys. It's 2 really elite pitches, but you need a third get-me-over, and right now the cutter and slider are not doing that. And it's hard because you have to take away the outcomes, which have been really good for Henderson, to project his long-term future. And you just have to think about how many guys have gotten away with throwing 2 pitches in the major leagues. Not that many, right? Not that many. And all of them are probably relievers. In 2025, off-speed pitches are on the rise, though, thanks in large part to splitter usage increasing, especially to right-handed hitters. Why does this splitter usage increase? Well, the splitter is a more platoon-neutral pitch than the traditional changeup or circle change because it has more vertical movement. Vertical movement is how we establish that a pitch is platoon neutral because it works against both sides of the plate really well. You can throw right-on-right splitters to good success. We see Logan Gilbert, Kevin Gausman do it all the time. But then that splitter plays even better towards left-handed hitters, giving you another edge on that side of the plate. This isn't a changeup, which you can only throw to one side of the plate traditionally. Also, alongside this splitter movement, we have the kick change, right? I subscribe to it. It gives players who struggle to throw a splitter an opportunity to capture a similarly moving pitch. Players currently throwing the kick change include Hayden Birdsong, Andres Munoz in limited action, Pablo Lopez, Jack Leiter, who's been really good this year, Davis Martin, Clay Holmes, Tyler McGill, and Griffin Canning. Those are not as star-studded of names as we've mentioned earlier in this video, but it's important to note who's tinkering with these pitches, and I believe we'll start seeing even more soon because a lot of guys have already bought into the kick change movement, and it's only been about a year since it came out. Let's get into this movement, though, that I call the sweeper era. That's what I've been calling the last couple years of Major League Baseball pitching, because everyone wants sweepers. They're like the new sexy pitch. It's important to note, though, that sweepers are actually starting to decline in usage, hinting that teams are starting to understand that sweepers are not as good as they thought they were. Recently, I went to the MLB Draft Combine, and the majority of prep pitchers that I saw at the Combine threw huge sweepers with huge velocity differences that were so far away from their fastball. And no prep pitcher throws a cutter, because who wants to throw a cutter when you're 17 years old? It's not a cool pitch. Sweepers and fastballs and even changeups are way cooler than cutters. So rounding out an arsenal for these prep guys is going to have to include either tightening up that breaking ball or adding a cutter to bridge between their fastball and sweeper. Sweepers are hard to command, which is why we're seeing walk rates, start to creep up in baseball. Sweepers are also one of the easiest pitches to get direct feedback on. When a baseball breaks a bunch from the pitcher's point of view from the mound, the general thought is that that is the better pitch. I think that this is especially notable in pronators who are only able to access this large glove side movement by a sharp decline in velocity, which is harder to recognize from the mound. Pronators think that they have a really good pitch in the works, but it's 17 miles per hour off their fastball. They just can't tell that from the mound because they are throwing the ball themselves. When we train strictly pitch movement, we lose the part of the game that will get you on the field in the first place, command, right? And I don't want to get into this tangent about why command is king in the era of stuff plus and sweepers. But in order to catch the field, you have to be able to throw these breaking balls for strikes, and sweepers are harder to throw for strikes than other breaking balls. So maybe not the best idea for young people to be throwing a bunch of sweepers, despite how cool they look. When we look at right-handed pitcher slider variations based on their whiff versus both sides, we see a really interesting trend start to come forth. Let's go by breaker types here, and this is via Lance Brozdowski's research in one of his recent YouTube videos titled, "These Three Teams Are Pitching Innovators." These are his numbers, not mine. I am borrowing. Thank you, Lance. The downer-shaped breaking ball. We're going to talk about this a lot coming up. You can see the movement profile there on the screen. Look at its whiff versus lefties and righties. It's nearly identical. That indicates it's a platoon neutral pitch, and 40% whiff rate, pretty dang good. The sweeper, however, opposite-handed, 28%. Same-handed, 35%. So even right-on-right sweepers don't perform as well as downer-shaped breaking balls. And then the bullet or gyro slider performs slightly better than the sweeper, but not as good as the downer/death ball. The death ball was founded by Tread Athletics, and it denotes a pitch that has less than 4 inches of horizontal sweep, and it's between -3 and -8 vertical movement. So it sits in an area of the pitch chart that you don't often see get utilized, which makes it a different shape than people are used to seeing, which therefore gives it this layer of deception, which lets it play up from any stuff grades you might put on this death ball pitch. This breaking ball shape is also more available to pronators because it doesn't rely on horizontal movement. These pronators can throw breaking balls a little bit harder when they're more of a gyro shape. All right, so this death ball is the platoon neutral option to breaking balls that can be thrown by almost everyone. Why are we not throwing this pitch more? I scream in the insane asylum. Verti sweeper is also a pitch that is starting to gain some traction throughout baseball, and that's a sweeper that doesn't drop as much as you expect it to. It's much more of a horizontal pitch than a two-plane pitch. Right, so this is a pitch that drops less than its expected movement profile, likely because it's being thrown from a lower slot by a really good supinator who can throw that thing really hard to negate the vertical movement effects on the baseball. I'm interested to see if traditional sweepers get overtaken by this more vertical sweeper soon, because we've seen better results from the verti sweeper in a short sample size. Seam effects are also a huge part of this discussion, guys. And when I did talk to Lance about this project, he thought that maybe only a handful of teams, 7 or 8, have actually optimized an objective approach to seam shifted wake at this point. We know about seam shifted wake. There's studies. Go watch any tread athletics video. They love talking about seam shifted wake, and for good reason. It can expand an arsenal and create some really nasty pitches that people didn't think they could actually throw. Earlier in this decade, the Baltimore Orioles forced sweepers and seam shifted wake on all of their pitches throughout their system, which in hindsight was a poor approach because seam shifted wake needs to be tailored to the pitcher. We need to understand pronator versus supinator. We need to understand slot angles. We need to understand things like finger length. All these things matter for seam shifted wake, and it needs to be a more holistic approach to SSW. And honestly, seam shifted wake is just under appreciated and under researched right now because we've got the bare information that allows guys to throw these nasty sinkers, but we don't actually fully understand everything behind seam shifted wake. Something that I really want to come out as public is what's happening during the ball flight as a guy throws it, and we see seam shifted wake starts to take place, right? So we see him cut this sinker right here with this grip, and it starts to move as expected, and then we see it start to divulge off of its intended route, and that is the seam shifted wake taking effect, right? That Magnus effect and all these other fancy buzzwords that people like to throw around. We don't actually have the nanosecond by nanosecond spin profile for these pitches. What I want to know is, how does arm angle, how does finger pressure, how does grip, how does seam orientation affect the actual ball flight of a pitch so we can get better, more efficient seam shifted wake pitches. So we can basically fully optimize seam shifted wake towards individuals. Platoons and pitch neutrality are also a huge part of this conversation, right? We've talked about it a lot, this platoon neutral approach. Well, there's more platoons than ever before in baseball, despite there being less switch hitters. Pitchers are seeing opposite-handed hitters at an increasing rate. We see a team like the Tigers succeed in the American League by deploying a bunch of platoons. It works. Research started in kind of the late 2000s, early 2010s on the platoon, as you can see here, showing different fastball shapes and how they perform versus both sides, all right? Platoons have always been an area of interest within baseball, and I credit a lot of that to the Hardball Times, who did a lot of the early advanced research. This is one of my favorite graphics right here. I got this from Lance as well, showing platoon scores for each type of pitch, right? So let's take a look here. What is the worst platoon pitch? The slurve. That could also be described as a sweeper nowadays. The sinker, right? It only works against the same-handed hitter. The heater, that is your traditional bad fastball. People used to throw dead zone all the time. It doesn't really work against both sides, believe it or not. Slider, rider, cutter, right? Those are more one-sided pitches right there. Then we get down to this, almost zero mark, and we look at our more platoon neutral pitches. The jumping fastball. I don't actually know what that is. The rising fastball. I know what that is. Pretty platoon neutral pitch, if you ask me. Somewhere in the middle, trending towards platoon neutral. The power change. That's a word I haven't heard in a while. Platoon neutral pitch. People still throw power changes. They just don't call them that. The tight curve and the roundhouse curve, right? So these are our two most platoon neutral breaking balls alongside the straight change, which could also be described as a splitter or a kick change because it is straight. So it models that movement profile of a splitter or a kick change where it hugs the zero horizontal line a little closer than a traditional circle changeup. So all in all, just like we talked about earlier, we see the pitches that are closer to the zero line horizontally typically play better as platoon neutral pitches, with maybe the exception of cutters. It seems like nowadays we're trending closer to guys having two different arsenals against each side of the plate. You kind of saw that with Skubal in our example earlier. He throws completely different pitches to both sides of the plate, and it really works for him. But not everyone is Skubal, right? So if you add a platoon neutral pitch into your mix, that takes away one extra pitch that you have to learn to throw to just one side of the plate. If you add in this death ball, maybe you can get rid of a sweeper because you can throw the death ball with similar effect to righties as a sweeper would have, if not better if you looked at our whiff rates earlier. Let's bring up the concept of pitch decay too. So pitches get worse throughout a game, right? Expected slug rises every at-bat that a hitter gets against a pitcher throughout the same game. Why? Familiarity. right? The pitcher's getting tired. The hitter started to see all of his different shapes. It starts to become a little easier to identify those early. They start understanding how a pitcher's trying to work a hitter, right? I fell victim to this when I was playing all the time. I'd fall into tendencies and someone would sit on a changeup and then it would get hit very, very far. It happens, right? This is where an Arsenal's depth comes into play as a beneficial thing. Despite me earlier saying Arsenal depth doesn't matter, it does because of something like pitch decay. If you're one of the best pitchers in the league by xFIP, you probably throw a bunch of innings too, right? So we talked about those top 5 lefties and righties earlier. Remember how they threw more pitches than anyone else? They also get deeper into games than anyone else. That's because they throw more pitches, negating the effects of pitch decay because they just have more options and more opportunities, different pitch selections, throw them in different locations, throw them in different counts. They just have more chances to figure things out. Having a 5+ pitch arsenal simply just allows for starters to work deeper into games, saving relievers, improving team outcomes and pitcher statistics. And a 5-pitch arsenal is really the only way to negate these pitch decay effects. When we look at the top 10 guys by innings pitched this year, one thing really stands out. They don't throw a whole lot of 4-seam fastballs. I'm going to study this a little further, and maybe this will be my next YouTube video, actually, because I want to get into the pitch decay weeds a little more. But almost all these guys that throw a lot of innings throw a secondary fastball quite often, something like a splinker in Paul Skeen's case, or sinkers or cutters. Right? So we're talking about guys like Logan Webb here, the workhorses of the MLB. They don't throw a lot of 4-seam fastballs. That's really interesting. It makes me think that 4-seam fastballs decay at a higher rate, and you want to still be able to access that 4-seam fastball late in games, so throw it sparingly early in a game. You have access to it later. It helps negate the pitch decay effects because 4-seamers are probably the easiest movement profile for hitters to pick up, but we'll continue this research, and I'll get back to you on that one. The catching perspective is also a super important angle throughout this whole thing, right? Catchers have the toughest job in baseball. Man, the toll catching puts in your body is just insane. They also have to develop with their bat. And now all these new defensive metrics are coming out, which catchers have to try and perfect, right? The framing, the blocking, the throwing, everything in between. Pitch calling seems like it doesn't matter as much anymore because catchers just have more things to do than ever before. When talking to some people, it sounds like organizations have internal measurements for pitch calling, which means that organizations know who their best pitch callers are in their organization. And they have ways to actually display that information, but that isn't out there for the public, right? We know which catchers are good defensively. We don't know who the best pitch caller is because all of that blame gets put on a pitcher, right? Their ERA rises when a home run is given up. The catcher doesn't have an ERA. We can't tell which catcher is giving up the most home runs. We could probably find that, but is that a good benchmark? No. Teams have special ways of doing this. I'm very interested to find out more about how they are measuring catcher pitch calling. What we really need to see is we need to see the analytics team pair up with catchers. We need to see buy-in from both sides, and this is something that Lance brought up to me, right? How can we get that buy-in from catchers to lean into the analytical perspective to optimize pitch calling? It's a really interesting debate, and I think the best catchers in the league have already taken that step. Like, what if catchers get super into pitch decay research? That would be pretty cool for me and guys like Lance, but that's neither here nor there. I think the better educated catchers in terms of analytics understand pitch calling a little bit better. They understand their own pitchers' needs and wants to succeed, and the world goes around just that much more, right? The answers to all these questions lie within what makes catchers better at pitch calling than others, right? So that goes back to these organizations' internal benchmarks for these catchers, right? Why is this guy a better pitch caller? What does he know? Because it isn't something you're just born with, right? It's not something that really you get more reps with and you become better at, although certainly that is a small part of it. What do the really good pitch callers in MLB do that the bad pitch callers don't do? It's probably a lot of analytical research, but I'd be interested to see what exactly that entails. Arm angles are also a huge part of this debate, and we've seen the arm angles and health debate start popping up more in the last few years with multiple studies coming out that kind of contradict each other. I've seen a bunch of studies that say that arm angle is a key predictor of something like Tommy John surgery or elbow stress. So between 35 degrees and 50 degrees of arm angle, we see torque rise in the elbow based on this graphic by David Girth here, which comes from Driveline's Open Biomechanics Research Pool. This has been negated by other studies, so it's really hard to tell exactly how arm angle affects pitcher health. In my opinion, it sounds like it's a little better to be lower because most studies say that, and other studies say, oh, there is nothing going on. I'm not here to compare and contrast studies, but I'm here to say that in my personal experience, I always felt a little bit better and freer with my arm when it was a little bit lower. I felt like less stress was being put on it when I was from my more natural lower slot. When I was a little bit higher, that's when elbow and shoulder injuries started to creep into my life, all right? Just because it was my experience doesn't mean it was everyone's experience. But some guys like Garrett Crochet have dropped their slot a little bit. Paul Skeens early in the year had dropped his slot a little bit. We've seen different guys slightly lower their slot. A guy like Max Fried did it too when heading over to the Yankees. So maybe these teams do believe that a slightly lower arm angle will actually help preserve the health of their pitchers. It's hard to tell right now, though. However, that doesn't mean that high arm angle guys are bad. Let's look at Trey Savage, who is a minor league pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays, who throws from a 72-degree arm angle. That's absolutely insane. We're way up here with it. It's super funky, and when you look at his pitch movement profile, I mean, look at that thing. All 4 of his pitches land in the upper right-hand quadrant of the pitch movement plot. He does not pass the 0 line of horizontal movement or the 0 line of vertical movement, right? He is always in the positive up there in the top right-hand corner. That's really interesting. That's a look that you don't see all that often. That's what we call deception. Deception is a huge part of baseball, and when you throw things that people don't often see, it makes them that much better, right? Because baseball is a repetition game. When you have 700 plate appearances a year and you see 2,000-3,000 pitches, right, a lot of them start to look the same, and you get really good at hitting those ones that look the same. It's a little harder to hit those ones that don't look like the others, aka Trey is savage. Deception is something that's really hard to measure, though, right? Hitters can measure it because they're like, wow, that was a weird moving pitch. I didn't expect it to move like that. Or, wow, I didn't see that ball come out of his hand very well. That's deception. But how do we measure that in a quantifiable way? Well, the Rays are an organization that's always kind of on the cutting edge of this research, and it sounds like they've been doing something for deception where they measure frame rates and how long it takes to see the ball from the hitter's view. Combine that with some catching statistics to see, how early they pick up the baseball, how early hitters pick up the baseball, and then we're able to quantify deception a little bit better. But that isn't public yet, but I'm sure the Rays have done a really good job on that. So it's possible. Look out in the next couple of years for deception metrics to start becoming a thing. That's part of the future of baseball, it sounds like. So now let's get to this kind of overall point, the future of baseball. With all this information and research that I've done, one thing sticks out in my mind. The ability to be different than others is the greatest ability in pitching. Whether that means throwing from a unique arm slot or throwing 7 pitches. Being different is a separator at the next level if you don't have elite stuff. If you want to consider what teams are likely looking toward in the future, everything I've seen points toward deceptive supinators being an even higher priority than they are now. Deceptive meaning multiple pitches, maybe there's actual deception in the delivery, maybe there's weird movement profiles, etc., etc. When we look at this chart right here, we see guys from lower arm angles generally have better stuff plus due to their ability to spin the heck out of the baseball. When we look at stuff plus, we see that the extremes on both sides actually have better resulting stuff plus grades when we're talking about arm angles. So those guys in the 50 to 59 degree bucket have over 100 stuff plus grade for their whole arsenal. Then when we see the guys who are 20 to 29 degrees, they have nearly that 100 stuff plus arsenal grade as well. Those in the middle suffer slightly in the stuff plus category. How about if we look at average pitch usage? All right. The guys from lower slots can throw more pitches. All right. So let's pair those two things together, and we see that this 20 to 29 degree arm angle bucket has about the best stuff plus tied with those super high arm angle guys, and they can throw slightly more pitches. This is apples and oranges because the numbers are so close, but I do think it matters. Lower slot guys tend to have more options with really good stuff. if you're a supinator, no matter what, you can really develop 2+ breaking balls, maybe even 3 if you're crazy. So you don't really have to work as hard if you're a supinator because you have 2 built-in breaking balls that are going to be really good. You can probably achieve a high vertical break fastball if you have some really good coaching. And if you can even throw from a lower slot, man, you get that little VAA going on. There's 3 elite pitches right there. All right. This is how we see a lot of guys succeed who are supinators. 2 really good breaking balls, fastball. That's all you really need. But if you are a supinator, now we can access these secondary fastballs as well, like a sinker, right? Let's seam shift to sinker so we can get righties out even more. But now, what am I going to do against lefties? Oh, maybe you should add a cutter and a changeup variation, right? If you're a lower slot supinator, it might be kind of hard to throw a changeup. Let's try throwing a splitter or a kick change, for example. Let's find a way to hack the process to get to that shape without having to throw these traditional pitches like a circle changeup from a weird slot. It doesn't normally work. As previously mentioned, the four-seam fastball is dying. Despite people starting to utilize its shape in better ways, more pitchers will start moving away from the four-seam fastball as their primary pitch in the coming years, especially right-handed pitchers because they see so many right-handed hitters, and the four-seam just doesn't play as well as it needs to against those guys. Elite four-seamers from the left side might still hold some ground, but even then, the best fastball being used as a 1A or 1B pitch aligns with the new trend of increasing breaking ball usage and decreasing fastball usage. Low velocity pronator, like I used to be, is dead. RIP, I'm sorry, Kyle Hendricks, Patrick Corbin, Eduardo Rodriguez, and Bryce Elder. You simply don't have enough options with low velocity and bad stuff as a pronator. You just can't get the pitches you need to succeed anymore. We're not going to see crafty righties who are pronators exist anymore. Unless you can throw 8 pitches that all have distinct movement patterns, these guys can't because they're all pronators. It's a sad thing, but we're just not going to see the crafty guy from the right side much longer in Major League Baseball. All right, we made it to the end of this video, and we kept it under an hour. That is a huge win in my book, so let's recap this whole thing. All right, this is my too long didn't read version. Average to low slot supinators are the future and easiest development model for a combination of stuff, arsenal complete list, and possibly health too if we bank on some of those studies being good. Using good four-seam fastballs as a secondary or shared primary pitch, especially to opposite-handed hitters, seems to be a good idea. Recognizing pitch decay and switching pitch usage tendencies the third time through the order holds a lot of value. Right? There's over a 50-point difference in hitter X slug between their first AB and third. Arsenal expansion makes all of this way easier and more achievable. Deception is becoming a larger competitive advantage in a game where everybody is really good and getting better. Measurement of deception is still in its infancy, though, so we could see more deception in the future soon once that's more quantifiable. Platoons are becoming a more popular thing than ever before, increasing the need for more platoon-neutral pitches like downer breaking balls, vertical off-speed pitches, and high-ride fastballs. Sweepers are on the out, off-speed pitches are in, like splitters. A 5+ pitch arsenal helps defend against pitch decay and platoon advantages. A 5+ pitch arsenal also will be more accessible when seam effects are fully researched. But either way, 5+ pitch arsenals are coming to everyone. The best pitchers tend to throw more pitches than average. Once again, another reason for arsenal expansion, despite us not having the perfect evidence right now to prove it is a better thing. Because my last point, sadly, is that there's no clear correlation in 2025 between arsenal depth and production, but moving forward, this is all about prediction. Arsenal depth and the further research of some of these theories is what is going to change pitching, all right? So our future in pitching is probably a lower slot guy that's a supinator who can throw 6 pitches and has a really good cutter to bridge his sweeper and his ride four-seam fastball, and he's created 3 different tunnels between his best pitches, and that's just what it's going to be. And that might sound harsh, right? That's just what it's going to be. Pitching is becoming more competitive than ever, right? You see the kids nowadays are throwing 100 miles per hour at age 15 or whatever. That Hunter Pence's kid is throwing 99, and he's like I don't know, 15 years old. That's insane, right? Pitching is just becoming a further researched thing, and we're running out of a ceiling at this point. Like, we're right here, the ceiling's right here. To get to that ceiling, it's going to be the advancement in things like pitch decay, seam effects, arsenal expansion, so we can fully tailor these things to different guys. And that's what the future is going to be. And then that's going to be it, right? At some point, we're going to reach the limit. And then we're going to go back to guys who throw 90 miles per hour. And it's all going to reverse again. Kyle Hendricks will be back in 30 years and he'll be good again. But in this current trend in pitching, this is what I'm seeing. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I mean, this was a big undertaking on my end, and I'm so appreciative of anyone that did enjoy this video. You know, I'm a young guy. I'm 22 years old, trying to make a name for myself within baseball. So I really appreciate you guys, and please subscribe to Prospects Live. It's less $5 a month. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.